Phoena's Quest, Book 1, First Spark, by Chrissy Garwood. Chapter 17, The Price for Chivalry. Phoena sighed. Barappa jostled her to adjust his grip. She turned her head towards his face. He gazed at her, and that moment she knew. "You do have magic," she whispered. "You have to put me down." He shook his head. She didn't have time to ask whether he was denying his magic, or if he was saying that it was too late to stop whatever was happening. "Stand and deliver!" a strange voice shouted. Phoena twisted her head. She caught a glimpse of a thin, scruffy man waving a pistol. He had a strip of brown cloth wrapped around his face, and a wide black hat pulled low on his brow. Barappa guided her head back to his chest and stepped from the road. It felt as if he was retreating towards the trees that bordered the lane. "Stand and deliver?" Carillion cried, leaping forward with his sword drawn. "Is that the best line you can come up with? Ho! Prepare to defend yourself!" The swish of a blade sang in the air. Then a shot rang out. "Ha! You missed!" Carillion cried. "What good is a pistol if you miss with your first shot?" Something landed on the ground close by. She sneaked a peek. A smoking pistol lay there. Oramus joined the fray with a shout. "What? Are there only 6 of you? And only 1 pistol? The rest of you have knives? That hardly seems like a fair fight." "Put me down," Phoena insisted. The power was building within her. "There are 6 of them. Carillion and Oramus are going to be killed." "And what do you think you can do about that, my pretty?" asked another voice. Barappa stiffened. There were 2 more ruffians hidden among the trees. A rough hand gripped her chin, and then cruel eyes stared at her face. "There's a rich ransom to be had for you, sweetheart," the bandit said, and he licked his lips. "Come along, my pretty. If you don't put up a fight, we might let your friends live to boast about their bravery." A knife blade waved towards Barappa's face. He squeezed her tight. "8 pebbles in the river!" The ground beneath Phoena's feet rumbled, and Barappa fell to his knees. She tumbled roughly from his arms and rolled across the ground. When the ringing in her ears subsided, she saw fashionable boots appear beside her. "What happened?" Carillion asked. "Where did the bandits go? I didn't need anyone's help. I was winning." "Answers," Phoena croaked, her forehead dropping back to the grass. The gilded frame of the magic mirror pressed into her hand. She thrust it towards Carillion. Her eyes closed. "Oh-ho!" Carillion cried. "You put them in the river!" "Let me see," Oramus said, and then he began to laugh. "See how deep it is and how swift the water flows. They will be in a sad and sorry state by the time they make their way back to land. Plenty of time for us to get away to safety." "How did she do that?" "Ask her yourself." "Stop talking about me," Phoena said, taking a deep breath and lifting her head. "As if I wasn't here. Barappa and I worked together. 8 pebbles in the river." "What do you mean you worked together?" Oramus asked. "You and Barappa? But—" Carillion swore. "Help me," Phoena demanded. Oramus held out a broken branch. When she took hold of one end, he hoisted her to her knees. She crawled to Barappa, who lay unconscious on the ground. His whole body was humming and buzzing with brilliant orange light. "Don't touch him," Oramus said. "Let the magic sort itself out." "Does magic take care of itself?" Oramus frowned at her and then shrugged. "I'm beginning to think your kind might." "But he didn't have any magic," Carillion said. His father insisted that he go for reassessment at the start of each term, in case he was late developing his talent. This week's results were unchanged. He might have had no magic before, but there's no denying he has a healthy dose now, Oramus said. "Why has the skin on his hand changed colour?" Phoena asked. "It looks like the reddish clay from the riverbank." Oramus leaned closer. "Is that the hand he used to clear the mud from your mouth when you were having trouble breathing? Perhaps your magic has thanked him for helping you." "That's the same hand he put on your shoulder," Carillion said, "when we confronted your godfather. I saw you cover it with your hand as you smiled at him. I remember thinking he'd outfoxed us again in getting close to you." "Show us your hands," Oramus said. Phoena obeyed. Oramus leaned closer and pointed. "There's blood on your fingers. Are you still bleeding?" She searched for the wound on her arm and showed it to him. "It stopped bleeding now, but it still hurts. This is where the fish hook cut me before it broke free and snagged onto my petticoat. I thought he had saved me, but the fabric ripped." Oramus rolled Barappa over. He fell silent. There was a corresponding bloody patch on the front of Barappa's white shirt, where he had held her against his chest. "What?" Carillion said impatiently. "I thought we'd agreed not to keep any secrets from the other members of the Fellowship. You said Barappa didn't have any magic. What if the tests weren't calibrated properly?" "What do you mean?" "Barappa has a reputation for being skilled with mechanical things. Where the rest of us rely on magic, he uses tools to achieve his goals. I know there's nobody at the Academy who is better than him at opening locks." "Tools and locks?" Carillion asked. "There's nothing magic about them. We already know he's clever. How is this relevant?" "Did we give him any credit for the role he played in today's rescue?" Oramus asked. "Fishing was his idea. I watched the joy on his face as he set up his equipment. I didn't recognise it for the physical energy it was, because it wasn't the kind of magic I'm used to. I dismissed it as some kind of emotional compensation for his lack of talent. He was especially careful with the selection of his hook." "You think he knew he was going to catch her in the river?" "Carillion, don't you listen to anything I say?" Oramus asked. "All the key decisions we've made in this adventure have been because her power has called to us. You're telling me Barappa's decision to use that particular hook was because his magic wanted to join with hers." "I'm not sure I like the way you phrased that," Oramus grumbled. "Think about it. I jumped in the river, and afterwards I wondered what I was doing there. And you started pelting the river with rocks. You were getting closer and closer to the water. I expected you to fall in at any moment." "All three of us were being called towards her," Oramus concluded, "and each of us played a part in her recovery." "The magic humming has stopped," Phoena said, "and I can hear the coach. Is it safe to move Barappa now?" They watched the vehicle approach. The 4 chestnut horses that pulled the contraption were well matched. The coach itself had an upper luggage rack and a bench seat at the rear, as well as seating inside. The door bore the Western Brook Academy crest. There was only one man at the reins. He wore the uniform of an academy stableman. "Lord Carillon!" he cried, bringing the coach to a standstill beside them. "Matron didn't tell me which young lords I was sent to retrieve. Why am I not surprised to find you amid some melodrama? From the cut on your cheek and those rips in your jacket, it looks as if you've been fighting again." Carillon smiled. "Hampton, I'm pleased to see that it's you. We've just fought off a band of robbers. I'd be thankful if you didn't pass that information on to Matron. She would bring down a curfew. Of course, I'll reward you handsomely when we get back." "Matron has already promised me a reward," Hampton replied, as he sprang down from the driver's seat. "I am especially commanded to forget that I've seen this young lady." He opened the door and reached inside. Matron sent a thick woolen cloak to make the young lady's journey more comfortable. "When you've wrapped the cloak around her, Hampton, could you please help her ladyship into the coach?" Hampton paused, a speculative look on his face. "It's not like you, my lord, to pass up an opportunity to provide the assistance yourself." Carillon slipped his hand into his pocket. "If you knew the name of her ladyship's guardian," he said, drawing out a silver coin, "you would understand my discretion." Hampton accepted the coin with a nod and slipped it into his pocket. "Your ladyship," Hampton said to Phoena, and he quickly organised her transfer to the coach. "Thank you." Phoena leaned against the side of the coach, and Hampton tucked the long cloak snugly around her. Carillon stuck his head through the open doorway and grinned at her. "What about Barapa?" she asked. "Now that you're settled, Oramus and I will drag him over. Ordinarily, I'd tell Oramus to carry him by himself, but our unconscious friend is no longer a lightweight." Phoena frowned. Carillon and Oramus strained to raise their companion from the ground. Hampton hurried to assist. The 3 of them half dragged, half lifted the unconscious man to the carriage. When Barapa was bundled onto the seat opposite Phoena, Oramus sat beside him to keep him from tumbling to the floor. As soon as the door was closed, Carillon jumped onto the external running board and wrapped his arm around the door support. Hampton assumed the driver's seat, and the coach began to move. Leaning forward, Phoena studied Barapa. He was larger all over. His face had changed. It seemed more angular, and his skin glowed as if it were dusted with copper. His hair was now bright orange. His hands had doubled in size. Those fists looked as if they could crush rocks into gravel without effort. The seams of his shirt had ripped during the transfer, and firm muscles bulged through the gaps. Her eyes followed his form all the way to his feet. Like the rest of him, his legs were powerfully made. The only other person she had ever seen with such well-defined muscles was the village blacksmith. Phoena remembered visiting the smithy in company with Helga. Was it only a fortnight ago? Her friend had insisted on lingering to admire the bare-chested man at work. Helga had laughed at Phoena's shyness. The blacksmith had ignored Phoena, content to bask in Helga's adoration. and Helga was not the only one to smile prettily towards the man. A steady flow of young ladies had passed by. Afterwards, Helga had talked about nothing except the blacksmith for the rest of the day. Uncomfortable with where her thoughts were leading, Phoena wondered how Barapa would respond to the changes. She already knew how the chambermaids would react. Would he be happy with the extra attention? Carillion coughed. It would seem that her ladyship is fascinated by Barapa's transformation, he said with a grin. Phoena blushed. How are you going to explain what has happened to him? She asked, averting her eyes. Oramus will think of something. One of Barapa's first priorities will be to visit his tailor for a wardrobe to go with his new body. I've come to the conclusion that Barapa is the earth element, Oramus said. Your reasoning? Carillion asked. Apart from his rock-like muscles, Oramus winked at Phoena. I told you he was good with tools and locks. They're all made of metal. I'm thinking he's had some minor metal affinity all along. That could explain why he's the second best swordsman at the academy, Carillion said. Second only to you? Oramus asked. I look forward to seeing you bested when he comes into his full strength. Carillion frowned. Phoena closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, Oramus was studying her. He pretended that he hadn't been watching her and leaned towards Carillion. We should be considering where to look for the water affinity champion. There's another champion? Carillion asked. It hardly seems fair to have another man join the contest at this late stage. What do you think, my lady? Oramus said with a grin. Have you been entertaining any other gentlemen that we know nothing about? You talk such nonsense, Phoena said. I agree, said Carillion. What would she want with another gentleman when she has us to choose from? You're spouting nothing but nonsense. Oramus pouted. Of course, I dare not argue with her ladyship. His eyes twinkled with the hint of red flame. She leaned back into the furthest corner and frowned at him. He nodded. It's good to see that her ladyship has not forgotten the serious nature of our situation. Though having seen what her magic did to Barapa, I'm tempted. No! Carillion shouted, reaching in the window. He pressed Oramus against the back of his seat. One unconscious changeling is sufficient for today. I agree, Phoena said. Beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. Oramus looked from one companion to the other. He tilted his head and grinned. This afternoon has been very informative. You were telling us where we should look for the fourth champion, Carillion said. So I was. I'm 100% certain if the water affinity champion was anywhere nearby, they would have been pulled into her ladyship's enchantment along with the rest of us. A leather whip lightly flicked Carillion's shoulder. He leaned back out the window and said something to Hampton. Despite the open window, Phoena heard nothing. A handy little anti-eavesdropping spell, Oramus said. Silver or no silver. I don't know whether Hampton can be trusted. Make sure you pull up the hood on your cloak when you get out of the coach. Phoena nodded. Carillion leaned back in again. We're almost at the entrance to the northern wing. I can see Lord Westonbrook standing on the steps. Oramus, if you have anything to tell us, you'd better be quick. It is obvious that the water affinity champion is somewhere else. Oramus folded his arms across his chest and refused to be drawn into further conversation. Dear listening reader, I hope you have enjoyed this latest chapter from the first book in the Phoena's Quest trilogy. This is a beta copy, and the text may change between now and the official publication date. If you have any questions or suggestions that would make this chapter easier to read, please let me know. In return for your help, I will include your name in the acknowledgements as part of the reader team. Chrissy.